All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Whenever we talk about the climate crisis, our minds almost automatically jump to these images of, say, exhaust pipes, massive smokestacks, or just endless traffic jams. But what if I told you that one of the most massive, highly consequential battlegrounds for our planet's future is completely silent? It's completely stationary. And honestly, you are more than likely sitting inside of it right now. Today, we're unpacking the built environment. Specifically, we're diving into the fascinating, sometimes frustrating, and incredibly high-stakes world of green buildings. We're going to look at some really revealing data that explains exactly why the homes and offices of our future aren't being built today, and how a pretty surprising group of people actually holds the key to changing the whole shebang.
So let's start with a number that totally reframes the entire conversation. 40%. Yeah, roughly 40% of all annual global greenhouse gas emissions come directly from buildings. Not our cars, not airplanes, buildings. When you factor in the energy it takes to heat them, cool them, keep the lights on, and the embodied carbon, which is just the emissions generated by manufacturing the steel and concrete to actually build them in the first place, that makes up nearly half of our entire global emissions problem.
And hey, if that 40% didn't quite make your jaw drop, think about this. 2x, double. The global building stock area, which is the total square footage of literally every building on Earth, is projected to double by the year 2060. Think about that. We are essentially going to build another entire world over the next few decades. If we just keep building the way we always have, that 40% slice of the emissions pie, it's going to become this insurmountable mountain. The stakes here literally could not be higher. Okay, so how on earth do we fix this? Well, the big picture global framework for this is the UN Sustainable Development Goal 11, which focuses on sustainable cities and communities. But down on the ground, the intended solution is something professionals call Sustainable Facility Management, or SFM. At its core, SFM is all about integrating people, place, and process. It's way more than just, slapping a solar panel on a roof and calling it a day. It is a completely holistic strategy. It's meant to improve our quality of life and business productivity while perfectly balancing our social, economic, and environmental impacts. Really, it's the blueprint for how we survive and thrive.
But let's get real for a second. What does a sustainable or green building actually look like when you're standing inside it? Well, according to the IFC EDGE standard, a true green building is fundamentally high-performing. So on one hand, we're talking about a massive reduction in resource reliance. That means minimizing energy demand, using at least 20% less water, and really cutting down on those embodied materials we talked about earlier. But on the other hand, it is very much about the human experience. These buildings create substantially healthier indoor environments. We're talking about beautiful, light-filled, comfortable, highly productive spaces. It's a total win for the planet and a massive win for the people living and working inside. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Sure, green buildings sound amazing for the Earth, but they've got to be terrible for business, right? Actually, scratch that. The exact opposite is true. Just look at the commercial value here. Green buildings consistently see an 8 to 9% bump in sales prices, and they sell up to 4 times faster. 4 times. For the people actually occupying them, utility bills drop by roughly 15%. And get this, they see a 33% lower default rate. I mean, the business case is absolutely overwhelming, which leads us to a glaring, almost ridiculous mystery. If these green buildings are great for the environment, amazing for the occupants, and incredibly profitable, why isn't every single new building a green building?
To really understand that, we have to look at a classic market dilemma. I like to call it the green building standoff. It's like a giant puzzle where no one wants to make the first move. Let's start with the home buyers and the tenants. Their perspective is pretty straightforward. Hey, we would absolutely love lower utility bills and healthier air. But when we actually go out looking, there just aren't any efficient homes on the market. Basically, they're stuck waiting for the options to appear.
But then, if we pivot over to the financial backers, the investors, we hear a completely different story. They're sitting there saying, look, we would love to fund energy-efficient buildings, but we just aren't seeing the proven consumer demand for them. They're playing it safe, right? They are cautious, just waiting for a guaranteed return before they're willing to open up their checkbooks.
Okay, so what about the developers, the folks who actually organize these projects? Well, they're completely caught in the middle. Their take is, we would absolutely ask our design teams to create energy-efficient homes, but our hands are tied here. These conservative investors simply won't finance the projects if the demand isn't explicitly, loudly there. And finally, we get to the builders and contractors, and their stance is what perfectly completes this absurd circle of paralysis. They tell us, hey, we have the technology right now. We can build energy-efficient homes today, but the developers just don't ask for them. And there you have it, a total circular Mexican standoff. No single player can solve this puzzle alone, so the whole market just remains completely frozen, building the exact same old, inefficient boxes year after year. And honestly, the wildest part about this whole standoff, we have actually known how to do this for a really long time. If we take a quick trip through time, back before the 1930s, way before modern AC and heating, people used these brilliant passive systems, things like natural roof ventilators and underground air cooling chambers. Fast forward to the 1960s, and pioneers like Victor Olgaye were literally writing the book on designing with the climate rather than fighting against it. By the energy crisis of the 1970s, you had visionary architects like Norman Foster incorporating grass roofs and daylight atriums. And in 1993, the greening of the White House under President Clinton ended up saving $300,000 a year in energy costs. So clearly, the technology is not the barrier here. The market deadlock is. So, the million-dollar question, how do we actually break this deadlock? Well, the spark we need might just be hiding in a really fascinating piece of original research out of Ghana. Researchers over there conducted a green building literacy and housing choice survey, where they studied 736 tertiary students. We're talking about our youth, the next generation of leaders. The thinking goes, by figuring out exactly what the next generation knows and what they want, we might just find the exact spark needed to ignite real market demand. And what they found was just a phenomenal juxtaposition. When researchers looked at the students' past housing situations and their current housing, the actual presence of green features was extremely low. Basically, most of these students had almost zero practical exposure to sustainable homes. Yet, when they were asked about their future housing preferences, an overwhelming 78% of these students said they explicitly wanted a home with green features. So despite a current lack of literacy and exposure, there is this massive, untapped, latent demand just waiting to burst into the market. But the researchers didn't stop there. They really dug into the numbers to see exactly who was choosing these green options. The data showed that students who were specifically studying the built environment, as well as male demographics within this particular sample, had significantly higher green building knowledge. And here is the crucial part. That specific knowledge directly, strongly correlated with a higher likelihood of actually choosing a green-featured home. On the flip side, students from other disciplines who just hadn't been taught about sustainability had way lower awareness and were far less likely to prioritize it. So let's zoom back out to the macro level for a second. What's the big takeaway here? Well, this research proves a very direct pathway. Targeted education leads to literacy. Literacy creates confident consumer demand. And when that massive 78% wave of future demand actually hits the market, that's when the investors will finally fund, the developers will finally ask, and the builders will finally build. Educating our youth is literally the exact mechanism that shifts housing outcomes and finally advances that Sustainable Development Goal 11 we talked about. It really is the silver bullet that breaks the market standoff once and for all. Which brings all of this right back to you. The built environment isn't just some abstract academic concept, right? It is literally where you sleep, where you work, and where you spend your life. The market is standing by, waiting for the one thing that can change the world, your demand. So I want to leave you with this to think about. How is your own building literacy going to impact your very next housing choice? And perhaps more importantly, how will those choices help solve that massive global 40% emissions problem? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep asking the big questions, and I'll catch you next time.